The sun was slowly setting in a quiet suburban neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft pink. The warm evening breeze moved gently through the trees, carrying with it the laughter of a boy named Rami. He was only 9 years old, but his imagination stretched wider than the horizon. Every day after school, he rushed to the backyard of his home, where the most special thing in his world stood tall: his treehouse. The treehouse was not big or fancy. It was simple, made of wooden planks that his father, Noman, had carefully put together with his own hands. The little house stood strong on the thick branches of an old oak tree, a tree that had been in the family's yard for many years. For Rami, this treehouse was more than just wood and nails. It was his castle, his fort, his spaceship, and sometimes even his secret hideout. Every time he climbed the wooden ladder and peeked out of the small window, he felt like the king of his own little world. Inside the treehouse, there was a small rug, a few cushions, and a box filled with toys and books. Rami liked to sit by the window with his sketchbook, drawing pictures of birds, cars, and sometimes superheroes. Other times, he pretended the treehouse was a ship sailing across the sea, with him as the brave captain steering through storms. When his friends came over, they joined him in his games, turning the space into a battlefield, a school, or even a treasure cave. His father often watched him from the porch, smiling at the way his son's eyes lit up with joy. Noman knew that childhood moments like these were precious, moments that built dreams, confidence, and memories to last a lifetime. "Let him imagine," he would say to his wife, Sarah, whenever she worried about the boy spending too much time in the treehouse. "One day, he will grow up, but these memories will stay with him forever." The neighbors also noticed the treehouse. Some of them smiled when they saw Rami waving at them from the little window. Children who passed by on their bikes often slowed down to look up, wishing they had something like that too. Many of them admired Noman for taking the time to build such a gift for his child. To most people, the treehouse was not just wood on a tree, it was a picture of love between a father and his son. But not everyone in the neighborhood felt the same. On the far end of the street lived Mrs. Kiran, a woman in her late 50s. She was the head of the local homeowners association, known by everyone for her strict rules. She had sharp eyes that noticed every little thing: the color of someone's fence, the length of the grass on their lawn, even how tall a flower bed was allowed to be. Most neighbors tried to stay polite with her, but behind her back, many whispered that she cared too much about rules and too little about people. When Mrs. Kiran first saw the treehouse, her face tightened. She thought it looked out of place. She told herself it was unsafe, that it might break some community guidelines, and that it spoiled the neat look of the street. Every time she walked past Rami's house, she frowned at the sight of the little wooden structure among the green branches. Rami, of course, did not understand this. To him, Mrs. Kiran was just another adult who walked her dog and never smiled back when he waved. One evening, as he sat sketching a picture of a bird in his treehouse, he noticed her looking up with a cold expression. He felt uneasy and told his father later, "Papa, why does that lady look angry at my fort?" Noman smiled gently and said, "Some people forget how to enjoy small joys, Rami. They see problems where there are none. Don't let it bother you. This is your place, your happy spot." The boy nodded, comforted by his father's words, and continued to play in his castle. But deep in his heart, he wondered why anyone would dislike something that made a child happy. Days passed, and the treehouse became even more special. On rainy afternoons, Rami sat inside, listening to the drops hitting the wooden roof. On sunny weekends, he decorated the little walls with his drawings. Sometimes, his mother packed him sandwiches and juice, and he enjoyed his snacks there as though it were a picnic. It was his safe place, where the noise of the world could not reach him. And yet, not far away, Mrs. Kieran grew more restless. Each time she passed the oak tree, her eyes narrowed more. She began to complain at the monthly HOA meetings, telling other members that the treehouse was unsafe, that it was against rules, and that something must be done. Most of the neighbors disagreed politely. Some even defended the treehouse, saying it brought charm to the community. But every complaint that was dismissed only deepened her frustration. What was just a small structure of wood for a child had now turned into a thorn in her pride. And though Rami didn't know it yet, the days of peace in his treehouse were slowly running out. The morning sun rose softly over the quiet neighborhood, shining on the rows of houses with their trimmed gardens and painted fences. In the corner house where Rami lived, the laughter of the boy filled the air once again. He had woken early, carrying his sketchbook and a set of colored pencils up into his treehouse. He wanted to draw the sunrise from the little window, where the branches framed the sky like a picture frame. From the street, neighbors saw him sitting cross-legged, his head bent in focus. Some smiled and waved, and he happily waved back, proud of his tiny fort that stood like a crown on the oak tree. But not everyone was smiling that morning. Across the street, behind her neatly trimmed hedge, Mrs. Kieran stood with her arms folded tightly. She had been watching the treehouse for days, her dislike of it growing heavier each time she saw Rami climbing the ladder. She did not see the joy in his eyes or the love in the father's work. She only saw a problem that she believed must be fixed. Later that evening, the monthly Homeowners Association meeting was held in the small community hall. Residents gathered to discuss routine matters: garden care, street repairs, and holiday decorations. When it was her turn to speak, Mrs. Kieran cleared her throat, her voice sharp and steady. "There is an issue in our neighborhood," she began, tapping her pen against the table. "A treehouse has been built in the yard of Mr. Noman's home. I must remind everyone that such structures are not suitable. They are unsafe, unattractive, and against the spirit of our community rules." The hall grew quiet for a moment. Some residents looked at each other with puzzled expressions. A man named Imran, who lived next door to Rami's family, raised his hand. "With all respect, I don't see the problem. The treehouse is small, neat, and safe. It brings happiness to the boy. I think it makes our street feel warmer." Others nodded in agreement. "Yes, my children love looking at it," said another woman. "It's harmless." But Mrs. Kieran was not satisfied. She adjusted her glasses and continued firmly, "Rules exist for a reason. If we ignore them for one family, others will follow. Soon, people will build sheds, garages, or other things without permission. We must stop it before it spreads." Her words carried authority, but the room was not convinced. For most of the neighbors, the treehouse was not a nuisance, it was a picture of family love. They had seen Noman working late evenings with tools in hand, carefully building it for his son. They had seen the boy's happiness every time he climbed into it. No one wanted to take that away. "We will not take any action," the HOA secretary finally announced. "The treehouse is not hurting anyone. Let the child enjoy his play." The meeting moved on to other topics, but Mrs. Kieran sat stiffly in her chair, her lips pressed thin. To her, the matter was not over. Back at home, Rami had no idea about the meeting or the complaints. He was too busy hanging a new drawing inside his treehouse, a picture of a smiling sun. He felt proud of his little world, unaware that it had become a subject of debate among adults. One evening, As he played with his toy cars on the wooden floor of the fort, he noticed Mrs. Kieran walking by on the sidewalk. She stopped, looked up, and frowned at him. Rami waved politely, but she did not wave back. Instead, she muttered something under her breath and walked faster. Confused, Rami climbed down and went to his father. "Papa," he said softly, "why does that lady never smile? She always looks angry at my house in the tree." Noman looked at his son's worried face and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Some people see things differently, my boy. Don't let it trouble your heart. What matters is that you are happy and safe. This tree house is for you." Though his father's words calmed him, the boy still wondered why a grown-up would dislike something that made a child happy. As days passed, Mrs. Kieran's frustration grew stronger. She began stopping other neighbors on their evening walks, trying to convince them to join her complaint. "It looks ugly from the street," she would say. "It lowers the beauty of our homes." But most people only smiled politely and avoided her sharp words. The truth was, the treehouse had quietly become a symbol of joy for the street. Parents pointed it out to their children. Friends admired it. Even strangers walking by found it charming. Yet, the more the neighborhood accepted the treehouse, the more bitter Mrs. Kieran felt. Her pride as Ho-Ahead was challenged. She believed her authority was being ignored. And with every laugh that came from Rami's treehouse, she felt her patience slipping away. It was only a matter of time before her complaints would turn into action. The days of summer grew longer, and the neighborhood remained quiet and peaceful. Birds sang in the early mornings, children rode their bicycles along the sidewalks, and families watered their gardens. To most people, life felt calm. But for Mrs. Kieran, every day seemed heavier. Each time she walked past the oak tree, her eyes fell on the small wooden structure resting proudly among the branches. She would see Rami inside, laughing as he played with his toys, or leaning over the railing with his sketchbook. Every sound of the boy's happiness felt like a challenge to her authority. To her, the treehouse was not a child's dream but a broken rule. The more others ignored her complaints, the more restless she became. Her thoughts often circled the same idea: if no one will do something, I must. One cloudy afternoon, the sky was gray, and the air felt heavy as if it was waiting for rain. Rami was inside the treehouse, sitting cross-legged with his notebook. He was drawing a picture of a kite flying high in the sky. His small hands moved quickly with crayons, filling the page with bright colors. He hummed a tune softly, lost in his imagination. At the same time, Mrs. Kieran walked slowly down the street, carrying something in her hand. It was a small handsaw she often used in her garden. She had convinced herself that she was not doing anything wrong, that she was only fixing what others had refused to fix. In her mind, she was protecting the community from what she believed was a dangerous and unwanted structure. She stopped at the base of the oak tree. The yard was quiet, for Noman had gone inside to make tea, and Sarah was busy in the kitchen. Rami, still inside his fort, did not notice her at first. Mrs. Kieran placed her hand on the wooden support beam of the treehouse. She frowned, shook her head, and muttered, "This should not be here. It is against the rules." Then, with a determined face, she lifted the saw and began to cut into the wood. The sound was sharp and rough. Scrrrk, scrrrk. The saw bit into the beam with each stroke. Inside the treehouse, Rami stopped drawing. His ears caught the strange sound, and he felt the wooden floor tremble slightly. He crawled to the window and peeked out. What he saw made his heart jump. Mrs. Kieran, the stern woman who never smiled, was cutting into the very wood that held his treehouse safe. "Stop! Please stop!" Rami cried out, his small voice trembling. But she did not stop. Her face was set, her mind too fixed on her mission. She thought the boy was exaggerating, that nothing serious would happen. "Go inside, child," she said firmly without even looking up. "This thing is not allowed." Fear filled Rami's chest. He could feel the treehouse shaking more with each stroke of the saw. The wooden beam groaned under the pressure. He tried to hold onto the wall, his crayons rolling away across the floor. His little heart pounded like a drum. "Papa," he shouted as loud as he could. Inside the house, Noman heard the cry. He set his teacup down quickly, realizing his son's voice was filled with panic. He rushed toward the backyard. But by the time he reached the porch, something terrible had already begun. With one final cut, the beam cracked. The treehouse tilted sharply to one side. Rami screamed as the floor beneath him slanted, his toys sliding toward the open window. He grabbed onto the edge of the wall, his small hands struggling to keep hold. The structure gave a loud crack. And the boy's grip loosened. In the next moment, he tumbled down, falling through the air. He landed on the grass below with a painful cry. The sound pierced through the yard and echoed down the street. Noman's heart stopped. He sprinted across the yard, dropping to his knees beside his son. "Rami! My boy, are you okay?" His voice shook with fear as he saw his child clutching his arm, his face pale with pain. Neighbors rushed out of their houses, alarmed by the noise. A woman screamed, "Oh no! He's hurt!" Another shouted, "Call for help!" And there stood Mrs. Kiran, frozen, the saw still in her hand. For a moment, her face turned pale. But instead of rushing to help, she stiffened, her pride holding her back. I didn't mean," she whispered, but her words felt empty in the air filled with panic. Noman carefully lifted Rami, who was crying softly, his arm bent awkwardly. His eyes filled with tears of worry and anger. Neighbors surrounded them, some comforting, others pointing toward Mrs. Kiran. "What were you thinking?" Imran, the next-door neighbor, shouted at her. "The boy could have been killed." Mrs. Kiran's lips trembled, but no words came out. She clutched the saw tightly, as if it could defend her. But nothing could change what had just happened. The once quiet street was now full of shouts, fear, and disbelief. A child's dream had been broken, and worse, his safety had been put at risk. The sound of sirens soon echoed in the distance, drawing closer with each passing second. And as the blue lights flashed down the street, one thing became clear: the night of trouble had only just begun. The sirens were still distant, but their sound was growing louder with every second. In the small front yards and along the sidewalks, neighbors gathered in shock, whispering and pointing toward the oak tree. What had been a peaceful afternoon had suddenly turned into a scene of panic. On the soft grass lay little Rami, his face pale, his eyes full of tears. His small hand clutched his arm tightly. The arm bent in a way that made every parent watching wince. His father, Noman, knelt beside him, his hands trembling as he tried to keep calm for his son's sake. "I am here, my boy," Noman whispered, though his voice broke with worry. "Don't be afraid. You will be okay." Rami whimpered, his breath uneven. "Papa, it hurts," he whispered back, his lips trembling. Neighbors rushed closer, forming a circle around them. Some brought water, others tried to calm Sarah, who had just come running from the kitchen after hearing the cries. She fell to her knees beside her son, her eyes wide with fear. "Ya Allah, my child," she gasped, brushing his hair back gently. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked at Noman, silently asking him to make everything right. Amid the chaos, Mrs. Kiran stood frozen near the tree, still holding the small saw. Her face was pale, her body stiff as though rooted to the ground. The scene before her was one she had not imagined. She had thought she was only removing an unwanted structure, proving her point about rules. But now, a child lay injured because of her actions. Some neighbors turned toward her, their eyes filled with anger and disbelief. "You cut it down while he was inside," one woman cried out. "What were you thinking?" shouted another man, his voice sharp. But Kiran did not answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her throat dry. For the first time, her authority, her confidence, seemed to vanish. The wail of sirens grew louder until finally, a police car and an ambulance pulled up. Red and blue lights flashed across the street, washing over the faces of the frightened neighbors. Two deputies stepped out quickly, followed by paramedics carrying their medical bags. The paramedics hurried to Rami, gently checking his arm and speaking softly to him. "Stay still, little one of them said kindly. "We're going to take care of you." They carefully placed a splint around his arm to keep it steady. Noman held his son's other hand tightly, whispering prayers under his breath. Sarah sobbed quietly, holding the boy's shoulder and trying to comfort him. The paramedics worked quickly, then lifted Rami gently onto a stretcher. His eyes stayed locked on his father, as if he was afraid to let go. "I'll be with you, my son," Noman promised, following as the stretcher was rolled toward the ambulance. Meanwhile, the deputies turned their attention to the scene around the oak tree. Neighbors pointed immediately to Mrs. Kiran. "She did this!" Imran exclaimed, his face red with anger. "She cut the wood while the boy was inside. We all saw her." The deputies looked at the saw still in her hand. One of them stepped closer and asked firmly, "Ma'am, is this true? Did you cut into the support while the child was in the treehouse?" Kiran's lips trembled. She glanced at the crowd, then at the boy being lifted into the ambulance. Her pride fought against her guilt. I was only following the rules," she said in a weak voice. "That structure was not allowed." "I didn't mean," but the deputy raised a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, a child is hurt. This is serious." His voice carried weight, and the neighbors nodded in agreement. As the ambulance doors closed, Sarah kissed her son's forehead, whispering, "Mama is right here." The vehicle pulled away, its siren echoing down the street as it carried Rami to the hospital. Noman sat inside, holding his boy's hand the entire way. Back at the scene, the crowd remained restless. Parents hugged their own children tighter, shaken by what they had just witnessed. A little girl whispered to her mother, "Will he be okay?" The mother stroked her hair and nodded softly, though her eyes were worried. One by one, neighbors began to speak openly, voices carrying in the warm evening air. "This was not just about rules," said one man. "This was reckless." "Who cuts wood with a child inside?" another added. The deputies listened carefully, writing down statements. All eyes kept shifting back to Mrs. Kiran, who now looked smaller than ever before. The proud woman who once commanded every meeting now stood alone, the weight of her actions pressing down on her shoulders. The oak tree, once a place of joy and laughter, now stood with its broken beams scattered in the grass. The treehouse that had been a symbol of childhood dreams lay in pieces, its magic destroyed in a single afternoon. But even in that moment of sadness, something began to change in the hearts of the neighbors. They had seen not only the harm caused but also the courage of a small boy who had held onto his dream so dearly. They felt a responsibility not just for Rami's safety, but for the spirit of kindness and care in their community. As the deputies guided Kiran toward their car for questioning, whispers spread among the neighbors. Some shook their heads, some sighed, and some simply stared at the broken wood. The night had fallen heavy, and though the stars were hidden behind the clouds, everyone knew the light of trust in the neighborhood had been dimmed. But in the hospital, where Rami's small hand still held tightly to his father's, hope remained. And that hope would soon bring the community together in ways no one had expected. The ambulance had already left, carrying little Rami to the hospital. But the echoes of its siren still lingered in the ears of everyone standing on the street. A heavy silence fell over the neighborhood, broken only by whispers among the crowd and the steady notes of the night insects. The oak tree stood tall but wounded, its broken beams scattered on the grass like pieces of a fallen dream. Two deputies remained at the scene, their uniforms neat, their voices calm but firm. They moved slowly, observing everything: the broken wood, the neighbors gathered around, and the woman standing stiffly with the saw still in her hand. Mrs. Kiran tried to hold her ground, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the saw, though she pretended to stand tall. She opened her mouth as if to explain, but no words came. One deputy stepped forward. His tone was steady, not harsh, but it carried authority. "Ma'am, please put the saw down." For a moment, she hesitated. Pride had always been her shield, but even she could not ignore the eyes of so many neighbors staring at her. Slowly, she lowered the saw and set it on the ground. The deputy nodded. "Thank you. Now, we need to understand what happened here. People are saying you cut into the treehouse while the child was inside. Is that true?" The woman pressed her lips together. "I was only following the rules," she finally whispered. "That structure was not allowed. I told them many times. Nobody listened. I didn't mean for the boy to get hurt." Her words hung in the air, but they sounded weak compared to the sight everyone had just witnessed. Imran, the neighbor who had always defended the treehouse, stepped forward, his face red with anger. "With all respect, officer, we all saw it. She cut it with her own hands." The boy shouted for help, and she ignored him. This wasn't just about rules, it was reckless. Other neighbors spoke up as well. Some voices were shaky with fear, others sharp with anger. "My children could have been playing there," one mother said. "She was warned, but she didn't care," added another. The deputies listened carefully, writing notes and asking for names of witnesses. Their calm manner helped settle the crowd, but the tension in the air remained thick. Meanwhile, inside the ambulance rushing through the city streets, Rami lay on the stretcher with his arm carefully supported by the splint. His face was pale, but he held tightly to his father's hand. Noman sat beside him, whispering soft words of comfort. "You are strong, my son. Very strong. We will fix this, I promise." Rami's voice was faint but steady. "Papa, will I play in my treehouse again?" The question pierced through Noman's heart. He could not answer right away. His throat tightened, and he looked out of the small ambulance window at the flashing lights. Finally, he squeezed his son's hand and said, "We will build something even better, my boy. You will play again." Back on the street, the deputies turned toward Kiran once more. "Ma'am," one of them said, "a child is hurt. This is no longer just about community rules. We will need you to come with us for questioning." Her face drained of color. For years, she had spoken with authority, making others follow her instructions. But now, the situation was different. The eyes of the community that once obeyed her were now filled with disappointment and anger. She opened her mouth to protest, but all she managed was a faint, "I didn't mean," before the deputy gently interrupted. "You can explain everything at the station." The neighbors watched silently as the deputies guided her toward their car. Some shook their heads, others whispered quietly. A few simply stood in silence, struggling to believe what had just happened. The oak tree, stripped of its wooden crown, looked lonely in the moonlight. For years, it had been just a tree, but for one summer it had carried the dreams of a child. Now, its branches stretched empty against the darkening sky, as though mourning the joy that had been taken from it. Inside their homes, families talked about what they had witnessed. Parents tucked their children into bed with extra care that night, reminding them of safety and kindness. Some children asked, "Why would she do that?" but their parents could only sigh and say, "Sometimes grown ups forget what really matters." In the hospital, Sarah sat beside Rami's bed after the doctors confirmed his arm was broken but would heal with proper care. Relief mixed with sadness in her heart. She stroked her son's hair gently, whispering prayers of thanks that the injury was not worse. Noman sat quietly on the other side, his hands folded tightly, his eyes fixed on his son. He thought about the hours he had spent building that treehouse, the joy it had brought, and the sudden pain it had caused. His chest ached, not just from fear but also from the thought of how something built with love had ended in such hurt. Yet, as he watched his son sleeping peacefully under the soft hospital light, a thought grew inside him. This is not the end. We will rise from this. We will rebuild not just wood and nails, but hope itself. And far away, in a quiet police station, Mrs. Kiran sat at a desk, the weight of her actions pressing down on her shoulders for the first time. The night was long, and the community was shaken. But in every heart that cared for Rami, a seed of determination was planted, a seed that would soon grow into something stronger than anger, stronger than rules, unity. The morning sun rose slowly, casting soft golden light over the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, but an unusual tension hung in the air. Word had spread quickly, Rami had been injured, and the woman responsible, Mrs. Kiran, was under police investigation. Residents whispered to one another, glancing toward the oak tree that now stood without its little crown of wood. Inside the police station, Mrs. Kiran sat stiffly at a small desk. Her hands were folded in her lap, but they trembled slightly. The reality of her actions weighed heavily on her for the first time. She had always believed that rules came first, that authority must be obeyed, and that a child's small happiness could not matter more than her sense of control. But now, seeing Rami injured, and hearing the deputies describe the incident, she could feel her confidence slipping. A deputy, calm but firm, read her rights and explained that she was being charged with felony assault. Mrs. Kiran's eyes widened. Felony. She had never imagined that following her idea of rules could lead to such consequences. Her pride, once so strong, felt hollow. Back in the hospital, Noman and Sarah sat beside their son's bed. Rami's small face was pale, but he tried to smile as his parents comforted him. His arm was in a cast, and though the doctors assured them that it would heal with time, the pain in the boy's heart, the fear of losing his special place, was harder to mend. Sarah held his hand gently. "It's okay, my love. You are safe now, she whispered, brushing his hair back. Noman placed a hand on his son's shoulder. We will make sure nothing like this ever happens again, he said, his voice filled with determination. We will rebuild, and your treehouse will be even stronger. This time, no one will take it from you. Rami nodded, still trembling but comforted by his parents' words. He knew his fort was gone, but his dreams were not. The treehouse had been more than wood, it had been a place of imagination, laughter, and courage. He would find that spirit again. Meanwhile, outside the police station, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Some were angry, some curious, and some simply concerned. When the deputies escorted Mrs. Kiran out in handcuffs, the reactions were mixed. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered quietly to each other. She really did it, one neighbor whispered. Cutting it while the child was inside. She will have to pay for this, another said softly. Even those who had previously remained quiet about Mrs. Kiran's strict rules now spoke openly. It was clear that the line between rules and harm had been crossed, and the community felt a need for justice. As the deputies placed her into the police vehicle, she looked toward the oak tree one last time. The broken wood lay scattered on the grass, a reminder of what had been lost and what she could never take back. The crowd watched silently, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone's hearts. Back at the hospital, Noman and Sarah spoke quietly about the future. They knew they could not undo what had happened, but they could protect their son, and they could teach him resilience. We will rebuild together, Sarah said, squeezing Noman's hand. Not just the treehouse, but our hope, our community, and his confidence. Noman nodded. He will learn that even when something bad happens, people who care for you will always be there. We will make sure he never loses faith in goodness. In the following days, neighbors began to gather around the family. They offered support, brought small gifts, and shared kind words. For the first time, many of them realized how much Rami's joy had touched the entire neighborhood. The treehouse had not just been a boy's fort, it had been a symbol of childhood happiness, innocence, and the simple beauty of family love. Even though Mrs. Kiran faced legal consequences, the community began to feel stronger and more united. People spoke to one another about safety, kindness, and the importance of looking out for children. In a quiet way, the tragedy had brought them closer together. And at the hospital, Rami smiled faintly as he looked at his parents. Papa, will my friends help me build it again? He asked softly. Yes, Noman replied, smiling. We will build it together, stronger than before. Everyone who cares about you will help. Sarah kissed her son's forehead. We will make it a place where dreams can grow safely. Nothing will take it from you this time. The small hospital room was filled with hope, even amid the pain. Though the treehouse had been destroyed and a child had been hurt, love and care had not been broken. The family, and the neighborhood, were learning that true strength came not from rules or control, but from unity, kindness, and courage. And far away, behind the walls of the police station, Mrs. Kiran began to understand a truth she had never fully realized: rules cannot replace empathy, and authority cannot excuse harm. The night that had begun in anger and fear was slowly giving way to lessons of forgiveness, healing, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Days had passed since the accident, but the memory of that afternoon lingered in the hearts of everyone who lived on the quiet street. For Rami, every moment had been a mix of fear and sadness, but also courage. His arm was slowly healing in a bright blue cast, and though he could not climb trees yet, he still smiled when he thought about the adventures his treehouse had offered. His parents, Noman and Sarah, stayed close by. They had promised him that the treehouse would be rebuilt, stronger and safer than before. But more than that, they wanted him to feel that joy could return even after a storm. Every evening, they would sit together at the window, looking at the empty branches of the oak tree and imagining what the new fort would look like. The neighborhood, too, had changed. What had once been a place of small disagreements over rules had now become a community united by care for a child. Neighbors who had stayed quiet before were now offering help and advice. Some brought wood, others offered tools, and a few simply came to encourage Rami, sharing stories of when they were young and built their own forts. One bright morning, a small group of neighbors gathered in Rami's backyard. Noman explained the plan carefully to Rami. "We will build it together," he said. "Stronger, safer, and more beautiful. But you get to help with the design too." Rami's eyes lit up. "Can I make a lookout tower?" he asked eagerly. "Of course," Noman smiled. "And a secret door too, if you want." The construction began slowly but joyfully. Neighbors worked side by side, cutting wood, hammering nails, and lifting beams. Rami watched carefully, learning how to measure and fit the pieces together, his cast arm resting safely on a cushion. Every nail hammered and every plank set into place felt like a small victory. Sarah brought lemonade and snacks, cheering on the workers and keeping spirits high. "This is a team effort," she said. "Everyone is helping, and everyone is part of this fort." As the sun rose and fell each day, the new treehouse began to take shape. It was bigger, with a wider floor, stronger walls, and a little balcony overlooking the street. A colorful flag flew from the top, proudly displaying the words, "Rami's Castle." When the day finally came to add the finishing touches, Rami was allowed to paint the walls with bright colors of his choice. Yellow suns, red flowers, and green leaves danced across the wooden planks. He laughed as his friends added drawings too, turning the treehouse into a vibrant place full of imagination. The community gathered that evening to see the finished treehouse. Parents, neighbors, and children stood in awe, smiling at the sight of Rami climbing safely into his new fort. His friends cheered as he waved from the window, proud of the teamwork that had made it possible. Rami's small voice carried across the yard. "Thank you, everyone. I love it." Noman smiled, holding Sarah's hand. "See, my love? Even after something bad, good things can grow when people care." Sarah nodded. "This is more than just a treehouse," she said softly. "It is hope, courage, and the love of everyone who wanted to see Rami smile again." Even Mrs. Kiran's actions had left a mark on the community. Though she faced legal consequences, the neighborhood had learned an important lesson about kindness, empathy, and the true meaning of authority. The incident had shown them all that rules are important, but care and compassion must come first. That evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Rami climbed into his new treehouse for the first time. He looked out at the neighborhood, seeing familiar faces smiling and waving up at him. He felt safe, happy, and proud. His heart, once heavy with fear, now felt light again. "Papa, Mama," he called softly, "I can see everything from up here. It feels like my castle again." Noman and Sarah watched from the yard, their hearts full. They had seen the worst, felt the fear, and now celebrated the triumph of love and community. From that day forward, the treehouse became more than just a place to play. It became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of coming together. Children laughed, neighbors connected, and Rami's imagination soared higher than ever. And as the stars appeared in the evening sky, Rami lay on his little balcony, looking up at the universe with hope. He whispered softly, "Nothing can stop dreams if people care." In that quiet neighborhood, the oak tree stood tall, stronger than before, holding up the treehouse that had been rebuilt not only with wood and nails but with love, hope, and the spirit of everyone who believed in protecting a child's happiness. It was a new beginning for Rami, his family, and the community.